Now let's look at Paraguay. As you can gather from the previous slides, the design is a red. We were not able to implement the original microtelco design, and when we get to the legal framework section, I'll expand on this. But in terms of project implementation, we found a good project owner, Fundación Paraguaya, very solid organization. Yet Fundación Paraguaya did not provide any counterpart investment. A little bit of in-kind counterpart investment, but no operations funding. So they're following a more traditional sort of development route of being subcontracted to implement the project. Now let's look at the legal framework. The purpose of the redesign was to try and modify the legal framework. Paraguay is very politicized, has a monopoly, it's a very closed environment, and the idea was that by providing internet to 100 organizations throughout the country that were very high impact and very visible, once they realized after having internet for a couple of years that this was an integral part of their operation, that they would be participants in trying to bring about reform. And this has actually happened. The project is in the newspaper 2-3 times a month, and the Fundación Paraguaya is part of a group that's trying to bring about reform. And prices have actually come down. When the project first started, the only thing you could get was a 64 kbps connection for $50, $60 a month. And now that 64 kbps is around 30. So there has been a response to the pressures of the project on the part of government, but nothing that has really allowed us to modify the model yet. Now, going towards partner negotiations, since these are basically services contracts, we're not trying to enter into a new business relationship with the telco. We're just hiring their services. It was very easy to do. It's green. Installation and setup is also relatively green, with the exception of lack of coverage. There are 66 points that are already installed of the 100, and the ones that are not installed, it's because of lack of coverage. But Tigo, the telco, has offered to install towers to get broader coverage into the areas that were selected. So this will be a green soon, we hope. The ones that are installed are operating very well, at least while the subsidy lasts. And Fundación Paraguaya is working with the beneficiaries on a plan to take over and to pay for the connectivity after the subsidy finishes. We feel confident that many of the organizations will be able to do it because they are working on good sort of business-based plans. And obviously some of them will not be able to do it, but that's why it's a yellow. In terms of scaling, we are not sure what's really going to happen after the subsidy runs out, but because of the press coverage and because of a lot of partners coming on board, including Conatel and Universal Service Funds, they have expressed a lot of interest of using this model of the subsidy model through a competitive process to increment the connectivity in the rural areas. Now, moving on to the content and context, this is a successful project as well. The beneficiaries are radios, schools, nonprofit organizations, and they are every day using the connectivity for content and context purposes and social development. So Paraguay, ironically, has the most reds, but it's the only one that's really up and running because when you redesign the model to just hire out services, it's much easier to do. It's not as innovative, but it's working and it's having a lot of impact, at least as long as the subsidy lasts.
Now, what are some of the lessons learned we can outline and extract from these experiences? Well, first of all, the project implementation always takes longer than expected. I mean, we took a significant variable in terms of adding some cushion, and even beyond that, it's just it was very much out of our hands. There were externalities that were well beyond our control, such as the time to reform law, the time that it would take for frequencies to be allocated in different countries, time for negotiations. These things, oftentimes took sometimes months, and in some cases up to a year. The business model needs constant tweaking. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, and you have to adjust it to the reality of where you're deploying the services, and also a great many variables in there, not only by the roles and functions between the franchise, the franchisee, and the telco partners and the context partners, but just in general, it needs constant tweaking. Again, the negotiations with partners can be quite lengthy. You need to be prepared for these. They're coming to the table with a great number of interests, and you have to be able to address those interests and come to an amenable relationship together. The enabling regulatory environment, we can't speak enough about this. And again, there's a really interesting contrast here, having Guatemala in the mix, as well as Paraguay. Those two are sort of almost mirror opposites. But even in a closed environment forces you to redesign and toss your entire model out the window. And on the other extreme, your ultra-liberal market has as well caused significant issues or restrictions on how you can maneuver in the telecom environment. The context projects are also much easier to sell than the connectivity business. Ironically, usually you would say the technical components are the easiest, but in fact, everybody wants to jump on board and be participant in the context projects. They tend to be the ones that have a lot more visibility. That's where you really see the impact of the connectivity and of the introduction of ICTs. So those tended to be green all the way across in various levels, of course. This concludes our presentation. I hope you found it of some interest and it'll spark some interesting dialogue. We'd also like to thank USTTI for the opportunity to be with you here today. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us via email. And we're posting this presentation up on YouTube. Simply do a search for Alexius International and you'll get to it. Thank you very much.